Welcome back or welcome in. I'm Artemis Game, and today we're going to be looking at the psychology of Joel Miller from The Last of Us. I love psychoanalyzing people, I have a master's degree in psychology, and I love games, so this makes sense. I actually got super into writing this, so this isn't my usual sarcastic, hilarious ramblings. If you want that, go and see my other stuff. There are obvious spoilers in this video from The Last of Us Season 1 and from The Last of Us Part 1 game, so proceed with caution if you haven't looked at them yet. In The Last of Us, survival is paramount. We start our story in a post-apocalyptic world. The protagonist, Joel, is a survivor who's learned to adapt to the harsh realities of a world ravaged by cordyceps infection and violence. But as Joel's journey unfolds, it becomes clear that his ability to survive is not solely based on his physical prowess. Rather, it's his relationships, and particularly his relationship with Ellie, that shapes his actions and ultimately defines him as a character. In this video, we'll explore the various aspects of Joel's character and his varying psychological states throughout the story. The key things that we are going to cover in this video are loss of childhood, trauma and loss, survival instinct, relationships, protective instincts, moral ambiguity, and attachment. By examining these various facets of Joel's character, we could gain a deeper understanding of his motivations and the impact that his relationship with Ellie has on his actions throughout the story. We'll start with loss of childhood. Joel is a pretty closed book, and we don't know much about his early childhood or if there was any trauma there. What we do know, though, is his parents were seemingly absent, meaning that he had to raise his younger brother, Tommy, all on his own. Joel became a parent right out of school, with his wife leaving him soon after. This means he was very young when he had his first child, probably around the age of 18. Since he was shouldered with the responsibility of single parenthood at a very early age, this meant that he had to take up some sacrifices to accommodate his daughter. Luckily for Joel, he had support from his younger brother Tommy, which we can assume played a significant role in mitigating any potential negative mental health effects that there could have been. However, even Tommy was reliant upon Joel, who he looked after well into adulthood. We see this in the first episode when Joel has to bail Tommy out of jail very late on a Friday night. We are told in a very short space of time that Joel loves his family a lot, he works very hard, and he's very much a stereotypical manly man. This will come into play later in his life when he deals with a lot of unhealthy coping mechanics to deal with his loss and trauma. Long story short, we can see that Joel has a lot on his plate from a very early age. This is enough to cause a lot of issues for a grown man, and I mean, this is just a regular, everyday bloke who hasn't even seen the world end yet. Even at this point in his life, I'd be suggesting that Joel go straight to a psychotherapist to talk about his responsibility overload and loss of childhood. We clearly see he gets very little time to just relax. He works long hours and constantly is providing for and looking after his family. This has left him with a boundary issue that usually results in the need to take on everybody's problems as one's own and fix them. However, this is before his trauma and loss. At the start of the infection, Joel loses the most important thing in the world to him, his daughter Sarah. The death of a child is always traumatic. However, this was something else. Your child being murdered and you're helplessly holding them in your arms as they die is about as max traumatic as you're going to get in this life. While we don't know a lot about the initial aftermath of this trauma on Joel, it clearly was never dealt with. This makes sense because in a societal breakdown of this extent, you're not going to be able to sit down for an hour with a psychotherapist. What we can assume is that it was unbearable for Joel. This is apparent by his admitted suicide attempt in the days after Sarah's death. His reason for living was gone. When his suicide attempt failed, his will to live didn't just magically come back. Instead, part of Joel just died, or as it's been referred to throughout the show, he lost his humanity. The survivor's guilt Joel must have felt would have been massive, and this would have led to PTSD. This is a mental condition that some people develop after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic or life-threatening event. We see evidence of this in the episodes When You're Lost in the Darkness and Kin. In episode 1, the blinding light to the face creates a flashback to the moment when Sarah was killed, and Joel reacts the way he wishes he'd reacted by annihilating this man's face. We also see evidence of avoidance behaviours such as drinking to numb his emotions. Again, in Kin, we can see evidence of persistent grief. The loss of a child is profound and life-altering, and this can lead to persistent feelings of grief and sadness and despair. This grief could be triggered by a variety of factors like anniversaries or holidays, or in this case, a reminder of Sarah's life, both through his inability to keep Ellie safe and seeing the girl who bears a slight resemblance to Sarah. Psychologically, Sarah's death in the world's apocalyptic environment turned Joel into a completely different person. He turned from a loving father to a sort of monstrous and cruel hunter who didn't even hesitate to take innocent people's lives to survive. And this was confirmed during Ellie and Joel's trip to Kansas, where they found a wounded man who begged for help, but Joel used this same tactic empathetic when he used to be a hunter and recognised it. Joel told Ellie the man was a hunter and not wounded and stepped on the gas pedal. All of the loss and trauma that Joel has experienced has deeply affected him and influenced the way that he interacts with others. He has built up emotional walls to protect himself from further pain and loss, and we see this throughout the story. Even with all of this going on in Joel's head, his basic need for a family to protect was projected onto Tess, and that's where we catch up with him again after the initial outbreak. By this point in the story, and after 20 years of surviving in a zombie apocalypse, Joel has developed a keen survival instinct. He demonstrates this survival instinct through his ability to read people and situations. He can sense danger and he knows when to be cautious or take risks. For example, at the beginning of the story, Joel is suspicious of Ellie and her intentions, but he quickly realises that she is his ticket to a lot more guns, so he decides to take the risk of escorting her across the country. Joel has a lot of trust issues stemming from his not insubstantial experiences in a world where survival often requires deception and violence. He's initially hesitant to trust anyone, even Ellie, who he's tasked with protecting. One example of Joel's trust issues is his reluctance to form attachments. Even when he begins to work with Tess, he remains guarded and unwilling to let down that guard. The two have a history of working together. Despite their shared history and close partnership, Joel still has trust issues and remains that guarded around Tess. This is further exemplified by his interactions with Bill, a fellow survivor whom he has a strained relationship with. Despite their history and mutual respect, Joel is reluctant to fully trust Bill and is constantly on guard around him. Particularly in the game, they did change it somewhat in the show. Additionally, Joel's experiences during the story only serve to reinforce his trust issues more. He encounters numerous groups of people who are hostile and violent, such as the Hunters or David's cannibalistic group. These encounters make it clear to Joel that trusting others is a risk that can have deadly consequences. However, despite these trust issues, Joel is capable of forming meaningful relationships, because he does with Ellie. Though initially fraught with tension, it becomes a powerful bond that drives the story's emotional core. This relationship helps to gradually chip away at Joel's guarded exterior and reveals a more vulnerable and empathetic side to his character. Joel is also skilled in combat and is not afraid to use violence when necessary. He can handle himself in a fight and has no qualms about killing those who pose a threat to him. He knows how to use weapons, how to move stealthily, and how to improvise when necessary. Another way Joel's survival instinct manifests is his ability to adapt to new situations. He's resourceful and can think on his feet, making do with whatever resources that he has at hand. He's also able to navigate through unfamiliar territory, and he can find his way through cities, forests, and other environments like that. While Joel's survival instinct is admirable in its own way, it also comes with a cost. He has to make tough decisions and do things he's not proud of to stay alive, and this has left him, again, emotionally guarded and reluctant to trust others. He's learned that attachment can be a liability in a world where loss and betrayal are a commonplace. In this world, Joel had to learn to be tough and resourceful to survive. This means that he's done things that he's not proud of to ensure his survival, meaning that when push comes to shove, he's going to do that again in order to ensure not only his survival, but Ellie's. This brings us nicely to one of the most central aspects of Joel's character development, his relationships. His interaction with other characters throughout the game reveal much about his personality and motivations, as well as the emotional scars he carries from the past. As mentioned, the death of his daughter is a significant trauma that he carries with him throughout the game. It's clear that the loss has left him emotionally void and won't form attachments, particularly with Tess. Joel's relationship with her is complex at the very least. She is his partner in crime, and their relationship is fraught with tension and unresolved emotions, really. Although the two work together for much of the show's opening act, Tess's early death leaves a lasting impact on Joel. Again, he's left alone and without a family. However guarded, it's increasingly clear that Joel needs someone in his life that he can call home. Other characters such as Bill and Frank and Henry and Sam reveal different aspects of Joel's personality. He can be empathetic and compassionate, because we can see that in his interactions with Sam and Henry, but he can also be cold and calculating, like he is seen with his dealings with Bill. Again, this is more so in the game, but the show do touch on this as well, but mainly put it from Bill's perspective. Perhaps the most significant relationship in the game is the one between Joel and Ellie. Initially, Joel is reluctant to take on the task of escorting her, but over time the two develop a close bond. As they face various dangers together, they overcome obstacles. Joel begins to see Ellie as a surrogate daughter and becomes fiercely protective of her. This attachment ultimately drives his protective instinct in the story's final moments. Because of his experience with loss, Joel's protective instincts are very strong. He takes on responsibility in protecting Ellie, he becomes deeply attached to her, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to keep her safe. This is reinforced over and over throughout the story by Joel's continued loss of those around him, particularly Tess and Bill. He has no family bar Tommy, who he does not even know is alive, and by the time he does find Tommy, the cement of the relationship between Joel and Ellie has already begun to set. and he feels a moral responsibility to keep her alive. Throughout the story, he's constantly faced with dangers and threats. His primary motivation is to keep himself and eventually Ellie safe. This is perhaps the most significant manifestation of Joel's protective instinct. He's willing to do whatever it takes to keep Ellie safe, even if it means putting himself in harm's way or making tough decisions that others might not agree with, aka gunning down a hospital of fireflies. Of course, I'm referring to the story's final moments. Joel learns that Ellie's life is at risk because of this potential cure for this virus that has destroyed humanity. Despite the potential benefits of sacrificing Ellie's life for the cure, Joel chooses to rescue her and keep her safe, even if it means outright murdering people and sacrificing the possibility of a cure. This leads us on nicely to Joel's moral ambiguity. Joel's not a typical hero character. He has often done things in the past that he's not proud of, and his actions throughout the story are often morally ambiguous. He is often willing to use violence to achieve his goal. While most of the time he doesn't have a choice but to defend himself, he's also willing to kill innocent people if he perceives them as a threat to Ellie. This is seen in the interactions with the cannibals group, whom he not only murders but he mutilates and tortures first. And I mean, while pretty much everyone can say that they had that coming, in the show it's intentionally left ambiguous as to whether these guys knew that they were killing and eating people. If we assume that they don't know, then Joel is just the bad guy here. He's just the worst. To them, he murdered their friend and fellow group member before murdering them horrifically. That being said, despite his questionable actions, Joel is also capable of empathy and compassion. His relationship with Ellie reveals his softer side, and he becomes a surrogate father figure to her throughout the game. He also shows compassion towards Henry and Sam, as I mentioned before, even going as far to risk his own life to save theirs. Overall, Joel's moral ambiguity in The Last of Us adds complexity and nuance to his character. His actions are not always easy to justify, but they are understandable given the harsh realities in the world that he lives. While he might not always make the air quotes right decision, his motivations are driven by a desire to protect himself and Ellie, even if it is morally questionable. Finally, we're going to look at Joel's attachment to Ellie. Joel becomes very attached to her, obviously, throughout the story, and his fear of losing her drives many of his actions. He has difficulty letting go of past losses and struggles to move forward emotionally. Despite potential benefits of Ellie's sacrifice, Joel ultimately decides to rescue her and kill anybody who stands in his way, including Marlene, who also had a soft spot for Ellie. This decision is rooted in Joel's experiences of attachment and loss, as well as his belief that sacrificing Ellie would be too great a cost for the potential benefit of a cure. He's willing to risk everything to protect the one person who he's grown to care about deeply, even if that means rejecting the possibility of a cure that would save countless lives. While Joel's attachment to Ellie is a driving force for his actions in The Last of Us, it's a complex issue that raises questions about the nature of attachment and the role it plays in shaping human behaviour. Human behaviour. On one hand, Joel's attachment to Ellie can be seen as a positive and necessary aspect of the relationship. They've shared experiences and dangers and faced things together that create a bond which is essential for their survival. Joel's protectiveness towards Ellie can be seen as a reflection of his commitment to her well-being and his willingness to do whatever to keep her safe. However, it's not all sunshine and roses. Joel's attachment to Ellie can be seen as problematic at best to downright unhealthy at worst. For example, it leads him to make morally questionable decisions, as we touched on earlier. For example, his morally questionable choice to rescue Ellie at the end of the game, which ultimately puts his own interests above the greater good of society, and even Ellie. She was never consulted about his decision. His attachment to her reflects his own unresolved emotional issues. It's somewhat limited his ability to form healthy and balanced relationships. It's go hard or go home for Joel, all or nothing, and nobody should put that much into one person. It's not healthy. Tragedy and love are not the same thing. While it's open to interpretation whether Joel's attachment to Ellie is too much or not, it is clear that it has a significant impact on the story and raises important questions about the nature of attachment and how it shapes human behaviour. So yeah, that's all I've got for you. What do you think? Like I said, this was pretty different from the normal stuff that I do, and I'm not sure if it belongs on this channel, but I'm just really interested. Joel is a complex and multifaceted character whose relationship with Ellie is obviously central to the story. While his gradual attachment to Ellie can be seen as both positive or problematic, depending on which way you look at it, it ultimately serves as a powerful driving force for his actions throughout the game and even into part 2. Everything about him raises important questions about the nature of trauma and relationships, attachments, and their combined role in shaping human behaviour. Let me know if there's any other characters from games you want me to break down. Joel's a bit of a miserable one, but I think that's what makes him more interesting. But yeah, if you've liked this, as always, please give it a little like. And remember, I stream on Twitch every Wednesday and Thursday, so stop by and say hi. And I'll catch you next time. Toodaloo!